Thank you so much, Julio. I would also like to start by thanking Julio, Dr. Julio Villa Garcia, who has invited me here today. Also, Mercedes Julia, who was part of this, as well as everyone else who I believe you just thanked. I'd like to also extend my thanks. This is my first time to Villanova. I'm excited to be here. And this is just a fantastic turnout. It's a fantastic room, so I look forward to a fantastic discussion with you here today. You may know that the majority of people on this planet are bilingual or multilingual. We don't have an exact figure, but we estimated that approximately anywhere between 50 to 65 people on this planet are bilingual or multilingual. So what do you think? In the United States, what % of people do you think are bilingual or multilingual? I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Do you think it's 0 to 25% is bilingual or multilingual? Do you think it's 26 to 50? Okay. Do you think it's 51 to 75? And anybody think it's 76 to 100? Those are my okay, right. Well, the US Census asks this question. It asks, does the person over 5 years of age speak a language other than English in the home? Now, this doesn't necessarily tell us whether that person is bilingual, does it? Because you might speak something else, but just not speak it in the home. But this is the best way we have to try to gauge bilingualism, okay? 19.7%. Who are the people? Be honest, who raised your hand the first? Okay, you were right. It's a little depressing state of affairs, isn't it? I live in Chicago now, and gosh, when I walk from my house to the Walgreens, I probably hear 12 languages on the way, right? Some places, the urban centers tend to be very, very diverse. I did some homework about Philly, who you have nearby here. Philly actually kind of represents the nation as a whole. It's only about 20% of folks in Philly who report speaking a language other than English in the home. So the arguments I'd like to present today, I'm going to try to get through them in about 45 minutes and leave us some time for questions and answers. First of all, we should help people retain their heritage language. And by heritage language, I'm referring to, typically it's an immigrant language, right? Folks come from another country speaking another language. We call that in the United States a heritage language when it's spoken by the children and grandchildren, etc. We should also do a better job with foreign language education, or what you might call modern language education, world language education, okay? And that multilingualism brings benefits both to individuals and to societies. Now, on some of these points, I may be preaching to the choir. If that is the case, I hope maybe you'll take away a new point, a new argument, a new something, and I hope that you'll engage in some type of linguistic activism. What I mean by linguistic activism is the next time you're at a party or you're in a class or you hear somebody, your doctor, your lawyer, anybody, say one of the many things I'm going to talk about here today, instead of just kind of thinking to yourself, yeah, I don't know if that's true, or I don't know if I agree with that. Now you'll know exactly what to respond to that person in a kind and informed way in order to get the entire country to start thinking differently about linguistic diversity, okay? Now here's a first and very important question. Is English the official language of this country? Is it? You're a smarter audience than a lot that I've spoken to. A lot of people say, yes, yes it is. And the answer is no, we do not have. But we have a de facto national language, don't we? Wouldn't we all agree that English is our lingua franca, right? But de jure, we do not have a language. Although, as we just saw, the great majority of Americans say that they're monolingual in English, there's no law or constitutional amendment that says so. Heath, I agree with her argument. She feels that the Founding Fathers believed that decisions about language really need to be left at local and regional levels, in part because there is a close connection between language and religious and cultural freedoms. Okay? Now, I also want to debunk another myth before I move into some of my major arguments. Do you ever hear this? Why don't they just learn English? Yeah, you're nodding your heads. People come here today, they're not learning English. The truth of the matter is they are. They are learning English. In fact, research suggests immigrants are shifting entirely to English more quickly than they were in the past. Okay? In fact, this study's a little bit old now. I'd like to see someone do another one. Lieberson and company studied 35 different nations across the world, and the United States is where people most quickly shift to the dominant language, monolingualism in the dominant language. Here are the top 10 non-English languages spoken in U.S. homes. Do any of those surprise you? French is surprising to some people, but now keep in mind this includes folks in Louisiana who speak French. I was a little surprised to see German is holding on, but of course this also includes our Amish-speaking communities. They're in there as well, okay? 5 years ago, Italian was on this list, and it's been ousted. So what we're seeing is the European origin languages are being replaced by Latin American and Asian languages. Well, anyway, when you report on the census that you speak a language other than English in your home, you're also asked, how well do you speak English? There's 4 categories: not at all, not well, well, and very well. The percentage of people who say that they speak English well or very well is quite high. Now tell me what you think. Do you think people tend to over-report how well they speak English, or do they tend to think, oh, my English isn't that great, when it really is? It's probably the latter, yeah? People I see tend to say, no, my English isn't that great, and it really is quite good. So we do see that people are learning English quite well. And this is in spite of the fact that there is a shortage of ESL classes in this country. They did a study a couple years ago. 60% of the free ESL, English as a second language classes, had waiting lists. Okay? There are a number of challenges to immigrants who want to learn English. No one knows better than an immigrant how important it is to learn English. Right? The thing is, when you work 10, 12, 14 hours a day, when you have transportation issues, when you have childcare issues, when the ESL class costs too much money, it's very difficult to you're not just going to learn it by osmosis walking around, right? So in spite of these things, we do see that immigrants are learning English very quickly. Now, some people think, well, we ought to legislate it. We ought to make English the national language officially, and we ought to have some kind of English-only legislation. Is this a good idea? Well, 31 states have done so. 31 states have official English languages on the books. No, Pennsylvania is not one of them. Illinois is one of them, I'm ashamed to say, since 1969. Of course, I was in utero, so I couldn't go lobby Springfield against it, but I would like to see it struck from the books. We did make a small effort to counter this. It's really, in most states, just symbolic. Doesn't really mean anything. But we in Chicago decided to fight symbolism with symbolism. We drafted a statement that Chicago is a multilingual city. And Mayor Daley, before he left, signed it for us. So if you look at the City of Chicago website, you will see the City of Chicago proudly declares itself a multilingual city in an official English state, okay? But this just goes to show you the power of the English-only lobby, okay? Only 3 states have any kind of protected bilingualism. You probably know that in Hawaii, it would be the Hawaiian language. In Louisiana, it would be French, very good, and in New Mexico, Spanish, exactly. Now, I'm going to cite here from Crawford, because I think he just hit the nail on the head. Official English policies, first of all, are unnecessary. Do we need to protect the English language? Do we need to declare it our official language? Do we need to declare the sun our official source of light and heat? No, English does not need any protection. It's also punitive. It's sort of finger wagging at people, isn't it? You don't know English, it's a law, you need to learn it. Yeah, thanks. Your law is not providing anybody with a single ounce of help in actually learning the language. It can also be considered divisive. Here's where you're to start to see the second and third generation immigrants angry at the recent arrivals because they don't know English yet. They're going to start to make me look bad, and that starts to divide communities. I think it's inconsistent with US values. We've always been a nation that has valued diversity. I think it's also self-defeating. In an increasingly globalized world, really, we're going to be officially English only? I'm not sure how that's a good idea. Instead of legislating English, how about actually helping people learn it? I don't know if you know who this gentleman is. This is Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee. And I think I've agreed with exactly one thing he's ever put forth on the floor, and this is it. His immigrant population has tripled since 1990. He sponsored a bill that would give legal immigrants vouchers to pay for ESL classes. He's putting his money where his mouth is. I want them to learn English, and I want to help them. He claimed that education policy, as you know, in the United States is a state-run thing. We don't have federal education system, okay? But he's claiming that it should become a federal responsibility. And for the record, I think I should state this, even though I'm promoting this linguistic diversity, I am first in line. I absolutely think that people should learn English in order to function here in the society. It is our lingua franca. It does join us. What I'm going to argue here today is that you don't have to abandon your other languages, okay? That's not the price of admission to come to the United States, okay? So instead of legislating it, can't we be English plus, right? Isn't English plus, doesn't that sound better than English only or official English? So I hope by the end of this talk you'll be on board with this English plus idea. So we've just looked at some evidence that immigrants are shifting very quickly to English, but now how about retaining their heritage languages? Remember, learning English doesn't necessarily mean that you lose your Chinese or your French or your Spanish. Okay? So we've seen that they're learning the English. Are they also retaining that heritage language? Well, unfortunately, the truth right now is that we have a linguistic climate, or you can call it a linguistic culture, that really aims to erase non-English languages. Teddy Roosevelt, I think it was like 1918, he has this really famous quote. I'm going to misquote it a little bit. He basically said, I am not running a polyglot boarding house here. You speak English and be a good American. The only good American is someone who's American, no hyphenated Americans, no other languages, we don't want it. This idea of the polyglot boarding house, that, you know, multilingualism is some sort of slum condition, something that we don't want, right? Now, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but we still see this today. I was just talking to a gentleman, a doctor earlier, and I told him how the reason I don't speak Lithuanian today is because my grandmother told me in Brooklyn in the 50s, you just didn't do that. You didn't run around speaking non-English. You assimilated. You spoke English, and that was what you did. So in a sense, I kind of, maybe that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't know. I feel like I was robbed of my heritage language, right? Have you ever heard statements like this? I think they reflect quite strongly our linguistic culture. Well, usually they don't say United States. They say you're in America, right? You're in America, speak English. Have anybody heard that? Everybody's heard that. Why should I have to press 1 to hear English? This is my country. If I go to China, I don't have to press 2 to, yeah, okay. It's rude to speak a non-English language in public because people think you're talking about them. How egotistical do you have to be to think that everybody's talking about you? Like, really? People have nothing better to talk about, right? Or how about this? I don't know if you can see this t-shirt in the back. Lovely, right? Now, not everyone who's trying to promote this English-only legislation, some of them have, I think, their goals are less bad than what I'm about to say. I don't know how else to phrase that. Some people, I think, this is a way to hide their xenophobia and their racism. It's not cool to say, I don't like those Mexicans. But it's okay to say, I wish they would all learn English, right? It's okay to criticize language. You see what I mean? In polite company. So what do you say when you hear somebody say this? If you can say it here in polite company, if you can repeat it. What do you tell these people when they say something? Does anybody want to volunteer what they've replied to people?
I tell them that the U.S. doesn't have an official language.
Very good. Very nice. Anybody else? Anybody else have a response they can share? Yeah.
Well, what I would say is instead of stating that, I would encourage the person who doesn't speak English to learn to say that if when you're in this country, you try to learn as much as you can and as quickly as you can. And I sincerely look in the eyes and tell them, because I guarantee your life in America will be better.
That's
but
nice.
I would never put it that way.
Okay, so you're very nice to them. Or, you know, sometimes they don't, I'm not going to tell you what I say to them. Sometimes they don't say anything to you. They give you the stink eye. Have you ever gotten the stink eye in the elevator? Because you're standing there talking to somebody else in another language and you get the look. You know what I'm talking about, right? They're convinced you're talking about their shoes or something like that, right? It makes people uncomfortable, okay, this idea of other languages. The Super Bowl, not this one, the one that from last year, do you remember the Coke commercial? Take a look at what blew up on the internet after they showed people singing God Bless America. I'm sorry, it wasn't God Bless America, it was America the Beautiful. The point is, it was not the national anthem, as half of the people said it was. So yeah, I'm telling you the kind of people I'm talking about here, right? Okay, so this was heinous. The things that you know cropped up. Coke's trying to present, Coke's trying to make a buck. Sure, that's their company, that's what they do. And so they try to promote this idea of linguistic and cultural diversity in the United States. And I mean, this is the polite stuff that came up on the internet. Now, the truth of the matter is we have a pattern of language shift that goes like this. You have your immigrant who arrives as an adult, right? They are typically monolingual in their language, okay? Maybe they learn some English here. They definitely want to, but don't we know that after a certain age, it's very difficult to learn a second language, right? We already talked about the reasons why it's difficult to get into ESL classes, etc. Okay, so this person has children here in the United States, or perhaps brings them when they're very, very young. Is this person going to speak her mother's language? Probably, because that's the only thing her mother speaks, right? So she's probably going to learn Lithuanian or Greek or whatever it is, okay? But she's also going to know English. What's going to be stronger when she becomes an adult, her English or her Lithuanian? Her English is going to be stronger, okay? She's probably not going to have the opportunity to attend a school where she's taught in Lithuanian, okay? So all of her schooling experiences, her socializing when she goes to the movies, everything is going to be in English, okay? Then she has children here. So this is the granddaughter of the original immigrant. Is she going to speak any Lithuanian? Probably not. Now, if her grandmother is helping with the childcare, in Spanish we call that the abuela factor, right? If you've got abuela factor, that definitely helps. Definitely helps, okay? And also sometimes abuelas bring them to the country a lot. A lot of this, there's no simple answer. It's going to depend a lot on birth order. So if this lady here, if she's the firstborn, her Lithuanian will probably be stronger than that of the third or the fourthborn, right? So there's a number of factors involved here, but the truth of the matter is this kid, there's a very good chance she will have receptive competence. Notice I don't say passive. There's nothing passive about understanding a language. She might have receptive competence. She probably won't be able to say a whole lot in the language. This was true in the 19th century. It happened to the Italians, it happened to the Poles, it happened to the Greeks, it happened to the Germans. It is still happening today. So these people who are running around screaming that immigrants are not learning English, I don't know where they're looking, okay? Maybe they're just looking at, at this lady. They're looking at a bunch of ladies and saying they're not learning English, and it's just not true, okay? In fact, just 2 studies that I can share with you, there are a number more. A certain number of years in the United States, the percent of young immigrants who have already shifted to English and abandoned their heritage language. Some languages in Southern California are lasting no more than 2 generations. In fact, what we're seeing now is a 1-generation language shift. Particularly, what I've read anyway, is in the Vietnamese community. You have parents who cannot speak to their own children. And as a mother myself, I just can't conceive of anything more devastating than not being able to speak. That is the degree of pressure on these young people to abandon their heritage languages. So it's absolutely true that immigrant families today are losing their heritage language. It would be one thing to say they're learning English, but they're keeping it. No, they're learning the English and they're losing the heritage language. And again, this is all of the languages. So you can kind of say that languages come here to die. The United States is a linguistic graveyard. The shift from the heritage language to English is very, very quick, or as some people say, shift happens. Okay? Now, let's turn this on its head for a minute. Let's think about how much money we are investing, right, for English monolinguals to learn other languages. Let's think about that for just a second. You know how long it takes to get minimal where's the bathroom proficiency in another language? Now, some people, I think that there are very valuable criticisms of this scale that the Army came up with, okay? But for an English speaker, they've determined that it takes this number of class hours to learn for basic proficiency in these languages. And that's because of their similarity to English, okay? Category 2 languages are, quote, significantly different, take a lot longer. Category 3, forget it, super difficult, right? For basic proficiency. So we're taking all these young people who have these languages and we're erasing it from them. What if these folks in the US retained their heritage languages in addition to learning English, right? If you think about all the resources and time that we're investing in foreign language instruction, why would we squander this resource that we have right here, okay? Not only do they have the linguistic knowledge, they have the cultural knowledge. Right? So just for an example, in Romance languages, lots of languages, you have what we call the tu-vu distinction, right? There's the informal tú and then the formal usted in the case of Spanish. They get that. They understand how that works. I read an interesting study about Hindi, the way they make some clicking sounds and move their heads and refer to older people as auntie and uncle. All these things they have and they get. And you know how Americans get that? When we go abroad. We have to go abroad to learn all that stuff. And they have it. It's homegrown. It's right here. Okay? So we've seen evidence that immigrants are learning English. We've seen evidence that they're also losing their heritage languages. Now that we're thinking about foreign language education, the truth of the matter is we are not so good at learning foreign languages in this country. I don't think it's because we're dumb. I don't think in general Americans are just dumber than other people and the other 65% of the world who's bilingual or multilingual. Here's a joke. If you know the answer, don't shout it out. What do you call a person who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. You can shout that part out. Just don't shout out the end part. What do you call a person who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call a person who speaks 1 language? American. Wah, wah. Kind of true, right? Do you remember back when he was my senator, he said instead of worrying about whether immigrants can learn English, they'll learn English. You need to make sure your child can speak Spanish. Actually, no, he was president already when he said that. Do you remember when he said this? Do you remember what happened on the internet? My computer almost exploded with all of the comments from people. How could he possibly? Do you know how many times he has said another word about language learning since then? 0. Crickets, okay? What made me think of when he was my senator was that I wrote to him because there was a movement in ACTFL, the American Council of Teaching Foreign Languages, to create a cabinet-level position, a federal position, devoted to languages, multiple languages. And I wrote to him and I said, you gotta, and he sent me a stamped letter, yeah, good idea. But then you can see the kind of pressure that faces. So what if we also began teaching foreign languages at a much younger age, right? We had Arturo Hernandez come to my university recently and he showed us these great brain images. And what they're starting to discover, we know very little about the brain, but what they're starting to see is that when you learn a language before approximately 8 to 10 years of age, it goes to a different part of your brain, okay? Now this doesn't mean that if you're over 10, forget it, don't even bother, you're gonna stink, you're never gonna learn it. Obviously not. But what it does mean is that we could think about starting a little bit sooner and developing what Hernandez called this organic memory. The language learning goes into an organic part of your brain. And then we wouldn't get this. Have you ever heard this? I studied 3 years of Spanish in high school, and I don't remember anything. They're almost like proud when they say that, you know? Like, none of that crap stuck to me, by golly, right? So we start too late, okay? Classes many times focus on grammar exercises rather than on communication. I mean, I've taken, I've heard of people taking a Spanish class taught in English, right? It should be taught in the target language, right? Recently, the Modern Language Association came out with a report. Our departments, our language departments need to really rethink about what we're teaching. We're not saying to abandon the traditional canon, but what about modern business, political, and community applications? Mount Holyoke actually recently came out with a really interesting proposal linking their Spanish department, Salud, to Latino studies and to sociology. They have a really neat program, and I think they're going to double their numbers of majors. It's a really fantastic program. Now, I think some of the reason why we teach languages so badly, so I'm not saying we learn them badly, we teach them badly. We wait too long, our classes are too grammar-driven, etc. We don't value language learning, okay? And I think there are 2 myths, at least 2 myths, that underlie this problem. First of all, oops, I went the wrong way. Some people think that multilingualism is damaging to society. Have you ever heard this? It's going to be a Tower of Babel. People won't understand each other. Look, in Canada, they're trying to kill each other. No, they're not, okay? Others think that multilingualism is somehow damaging to individuals. I'm going to give you concrete examples of that in a moment. Just to debunk this one here, Joshua Fishman, the very, very famous sociologist of language, did a study. I think there were 171 different nations, and they measured gross domestic product, they measured civil strife, they measured a whole bunch of different, I think there was 43 different factors that they measured. There is no correlation whatsoever between a country's linguistic diversity and its civil strife. Okay? Civil strife is connected to economic inequities, power imbalances. Now, it may be true that one language group, right, is oppressing another language group, but their problem is not language itself. Does that make sense? Okay, so I think that's important to keep in mind. Wouldn't it be much better to follow these thoughts of Nelson Mandela and have a country, if we were English plus, don't you think that could do well for us regarding issues of diplomacy, business? There's probably a number of things I'm not even thinking of. I just think it can go a long way for us as a nation, okay? That's the societal piece. The individual piece, this couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, every day it seems, not every day, every week, I get something on my Facebook from somebody, look, here's new evidence that bilingualism is good for you. Have you seen this? It's sort of all over the place now, okay? It changes your brain. It's like working your muscle in your brain. You can solve problems more quickly. You're smarter. We dress better. We're sexier. We're, you know, all kinds of things that they're finding about bilinguals. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much going on in the bilingual brain. Recently, they found that the average age of onset of Alzheimer's disease is 4 years later in those who are bilingual. Sometimes it's as much as 10 years a delay in the onset of Alzheimer's. And we're not quite sure why. A really crude analogy is probably fair to say that when you're bilingual, the brain is sort of exercising different muscles, if you will. It's doing different things in there and keeping our brains much healthier, okay? Now, if that didn't convince you enough, what about the bling bling, okay? What about the money? Show me the money. Saiz did a study where he figured out there's an average 2% language bonus, and it does vary by language. And then what Lane Green did, he's got a great book about language appreciation. He did a really, really conservative analysis. And so he didn't include average lifetime earnings increases, retirement savings return. He assumed a 45K starting salary, 1% increase per year. Again, super conservative. And then a 2% bonus for the language. Okay, in this country. What he found, of course, there's not a whole lot of German speakers here in the US, right? So knowing German as an additional language to English brought you this much money over your lifetime. Okay, it's a nice chunk of change, okay? French came in second, Spanish came in third. You might be saying to yourself, wait a minute. Everybody tells me I need Spanish. Spanish is so important, etc. It is. The thing, why this figure is so low is that there's so many Spanish speakers in this country, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So what I want you to come away with from this is not that, well, I better just run out and learn German. Sure, go learn German, definitely. But the thing is, knowing Spanish will probably land you that job in the first place, right? That's the level of importance I think the Spanish language has. Have you ever heard from a well-meaning professional, okay? Don't speak Greek to your kid, you'll confuse them. Don't speak Spanish to your kid. Don't speak Chinese, your kid's going to get confused. I have heard this from speech pathologists. I've heard this from teachers. I've heard this from priests. I've heard this from hairdressers. I've heard this from all kinds of really well-meaning people, some of whom should know a lot better, okay? I think part of their concern is that the child will not develop in English as quickly as they should. Now, it is true. We've seen a lot of bilingual children, mine included, that they can go through an initial phase in which it seems like they're a little bit behind their monolingual peers. But that stage is very, very short, if it happens at all. It's very, very short, and that child eventually passes their peers, okay? Another thing I think that really worries some people, where they say, oh, the kid's gonna get confused, right? Children are not confused. We are wired to be bi and multilingual. Just like spiders spin webs and birds fly, we are wired to learn languages. We're wired to learn more than one. We've already seen that the majority of bipeds on this planet do it, right? I think what some people confuse for confusion, actually, is a practice that's quite common. It's called code switching. Has anybody ever heard this term? Code switching is when you go back and forth between two languages in the same sentence. Y a veces ni te das cuenta de que lo estás haciendo, but you do it all the time, right? People do this a lot. Here's what you need to know about code switching in a nutshell. It is rule-governed behavior. People make a nice living studying the ways in which you can and cannot switch at what parts of a sentence, etc. It's absolutely rule-governed behavior. It requires very strong levels of syntax. People who code switch, if you ever listen carefully, if you notice, they don't violate the syntax in either of the two languages. It's like keeping a train jumping from two different tracks and none of the tracks breaks down. You have to have strong syntax to do this. People who don't have strong English or strong X-ish, whatever their second language is, or first language, you know what I mean, they don't code switch. They can't do it. You have to be a fluent bilingual in order to code switch. Also, code switching has become a proud declaration of bilingual identity. It's a way of saying, I am too, okay? So that's why when my students tell me I speak Spanglish, or I speak Arabic, or Chinglish, you know, they say it sort of with their tail between their legs, and I say, no, you should be proud of that. You should be so proud of that. Now, if you want to communicate in a multilingual context, if you want to go to China, if you want to go to Chile, if you want to go to whatever place, of course you'll have to beef up that piece of your language. But there is nothing wrong with mixing the two languages. In fact, it's quite natural. And like I say, it's a declaration of a type of a bilingual existence. You know, there's a comedian, his name is Bill Santiago. He's from New York, and he's got a lot of great insight into code switching. He says, you know, people say it's lazy. It's a lazy behavior, right? Why should it be considered a lazy behavior? You know, nobody calls me, I have two legs, I use them both. Nobody calls me lazy because I don't just hop around on one leg. Why wouldn't I use my two legs? Why wouldn't I use my two languages? Is anybody here a proud code switcher? Anybody a code switcher? Right? Can you imagine a life without, right? When you're with people who code switch, it would be like having a hand tied behind your back, wouldn't it? It just happens. It's your lingua franca with those people, okay? Absolutely nothing wrong. But I think some people hear this, they freak out, and they say, okay, stop talking X-ish to the children. It's going to confuse them, and nothing could be farther from the truth. And so what do we do in our schools when these heritage speaker children show up, okay? English, English, English, English, English, then they get to ninth grade, and we say, now you can study foreign language, right? Wouldn't it have been better to, you know, take advantage of all of those years and teach literacy and higher level thinking, critical skills in the home language, okay? Now here's something that a lot of people have some trouble wrapping their head around. It's counterintuitive and it doesn't fit into a nice little soundbite. The more quality instruction you give a kid in their home language, the greater their English is going to be. Now I go to groups of parents whenever they invite me, sometimes when they don't invite me, I show up anyway, and I tell them, listen, I know you want your kids to learn English. Everybody wants what's best for their children, and I agree with you, your kids need English. But the way to achieve that is to put them in Spanish. And then they look at me like, you might have a doctorate, but you're crazy. I mean, there's no way that could be, how could that possibly be true? It doesn't make any sense. If I want to get better at tennis, I should play tennis. If I want to get better at golf, I should play golf. If I want my kid to get better at English, they should study in English all day long. And then you got to show them some data and hope to convince them. You show them data about truly bilingual programs, okay, and how they work. In fact, one I'm going to emphasize to you here, not only is good for those heritage language kids who need to learn English, it's also good for children who aren't monolingual, like Julio said, and their family wants to cure their monolingualism. So check this out. When a kid shows up to school and does not know English well enough to be integrated into the mainstream classroom, there are typically three choices for that kid, depending on the school district. Choice number one, 100% English. Okay? You're not allowed to just throw them in there. You can't do sink or swim. That's illegal. It happens all the time, but it's illegal. Okay? You have to give them some kind of ESL pullout. That's one. The other kind is what we call bilingual education. You'll notice I use my air quotes. That's when a kid has mostly English. They have some pullout. I'm using Spanish in my example. Okay? It's only for the first couple of grades, and then boom, transition. Now, why do I use my air quotes? It's not out of any disrespect to my colleagues in bilingual education. They work very hard and they do a very good job. The thing is, the program goal is not bilingualism. The program goal is to transition those kids to the all-English classrooms as quickly as possible. There's absolutely no intention of maintaining the kids' home language. Here's the final one. It's called TwoWay Immersion. Some people call it dual language. Okay? That's where you teach the kid 80 to 90% in the home language with a little bit of English, and the amount of English increases as you go. Okay? And P.S., in these kinds of programs, you have kids who are learning English, but you also have kids whose parents say, you know what? I want my kid to learn Spanish, so I put him in this program. Now, when I show this to parents and I ask them, what do you think is the best program for your kid to learn English? They all go, well, it's got to be this one. I mean, right? Obviously, it's got to be this one. And then you say, okay, well, you know what? In California, they followed a bunch of kids who had been in each of these 3 program types. And they caught up with them when they were in 11th grade. And they measured how well they read in English. Here were the kids on a standardized state test of reading. Okay, here are the English-only kids. Here were the bilingual ed kids. Here were the dual immersion kids. And they're like, what? How is that even possible? Okay? I think part of the reason lies in the fact that the child who understands the language that's being spoken, right, from preschool, kindergarten, etc., is not falling behind every single year in their other subjects. So they're keeping up with math. Once you learn math, you don't have to learn it twice. Right? Once you learn how to decode text and read, you don't have to learn it twice. So they're keeping up with the content, and then the language comes later. Now, what about those English-speaking kids? Remember I said English-speaking kids go here too? Does their English suffer? This is what everybody wants to know. Does their English suffer? Well, they measured those kids too. They did better than the state average on their English. So no, their English doesn't suffer. And by the way, they also learned Spanish. Okay? So I've got a story. These are 2 kids who go to my son's dual language school in Chicago. This is Julian. Nobody in Julian's family speaks any Spanish. His parents put him in a dual language school. In preschool, he sat there like this. I mean, can you imagine? Like all Spanish all over. He had some English during the day, okay? Now he's in 4th grade. He can read Harry Potter books in Spanish, this kid. It's amazing. Also in his class is Joaquin. Joaquin's parents came from Mexico when they were quite young. They speak English in their house almost all the time. Well, except when abuela comes over. When the abuelos come over, they speak in Spanish. But Joaquin is dominant in English, okay? But he's got that heritage Spanish piece there. And I can guarantee you that if Joaquin were at a regular all-English school, he would not be writing as beautifully as he does today in Spanish. That's the power of the dual language school. And these are free, by the way. This is not some ritzy fancy pants. These are public schools. There are 10 of them in Chicago. There's about 390 of them across the US. I think they should be on every corner. If I had Obama's ear, that's what would happen. We would have dual language everywhere. Stanford University just came out with a study last year about the benefits of dual immersion. The data I showed you was in California. We have tons of data from Houston. I have data from Chicago. These schools are fantastic. Now, before I conclude, I should probably spend a minute talking about Spanish in particular. It is, the elephant in the room when we're talking about languages, isn't it? True or false? Do you think the United States is the 5th largest Spanish-speaking nation in the world? Well, what's got to be number 1? The nation with the largest number of Spanish speakers. What do you think that's got to be? Mexico. Yeah, there's like 7 trillion people in Mexico. Okay. What's after Mexico, do you think? All right, and what's after that? These are some of the larger countries. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Mexico, Spain, Colombia, Argentina, the United States is number 5, okay? We have 50 million Hispanic or Latino individuals in the United States. Not all of them speak Spanish. We just talked about that. A lot of them lose their Spanish. 36.9 million of them report speaking Spanish in the home. But guess what? This estimate does not include the undocumented folks who are here who speak Spanish. So let's get our calculators out. What is 36.9 plus 9.4? 46.3 million. And where does that put us on the list? Number 3. Very good. We are the 3rd largest Spanish-speaking nation on the planet. Okay. Actually, this number doesn't include the 2.8 million people like me who are not Hispanic or Latino and who speak Spanish in the home. If you add the 2.8 million people like me, where does that put us? Number 2. No one's going to beat Mexico. It puts us in number 2. We are the 2nd largest Spanish-speaking nation, okay? I think this says a lot for the ways in which we treat U.S. Spanish, okay? Because in the same way that you have Spanish from Mexico, Spanish from Peru, they are different, aren't they? If a person's in front of you and your friend tells you he's either from Mexico or from Peru, I'm not going to tell you which one. You have to figure it out. How long will it take you to figure out? Like 2 seconds. It's pretty quick, okay? So these varieties of Spanish are quite different. U.S. Spanish also has some very unique features. We won't have time to go into them today, but there are code switching is one of them. There are certain verbal uses, there are certain pragmatic uses. U.S. Spanish, it's not homogenous, it's not one U.S. Spanish, but it's also true that there's not one Mexican Spanish, there's not one Peruvian Spanish. But there are certain traits spoken here in the United States that I think merit being called U.S. Spanish and being respected, okay? We have speakers from a lot of different countries here in the United States. What else do we know? The foreign-born, U.S.-born split is starting to shift. We're getting more and more U.S.-born. I think, in fact, it's down to like 36 now. We know that 17% of the United States is Hispanic or Latino, but 22% of our kids. So it's a very young population. We also know it's growing. This map usually doesn't surprise anybody. If I say to you, where do they speak Spanish in the U.S.? Isn't this what you're going to say? You're going to say the Southwest. You're going to say, well, Miami. You're going to say New York. Maybe you'll say Chicago. If you're cool, you'll say Chicago. So this map doesn't surprise anybody. This is the map that surprises people. This is the percent change in the Hispanic or Latino population between 2000 and 2010. It's not in the traditionally Hispanic Latino locations, okay? So this population is definitely growing. We also have the #1 largest Spanish-speaking market in the world. Whether you think we're number 5 or number 3 or number 2, doesn't matter. We're #1 as far as the market. As far as Spanish speakers who have purchasing power, we are #1. It's also the 9th largest market overall, okay? And then just a final word about respect. You know how, have you ever looked in a Spanish dictionary? Like the Real Academia has their dictionary. And you might see a word and it says MX, that means that word's from Mexico. Or it might say ARG, and that means that word's from Argentina. There are certain words that sort of are only used in certain places. Well, guess what happened last year? Actually, 3 years ago now. My gosh, time flies. So the Real Academia has now accepted estadounidismo. We have our own category now in the Real Academia, okay? So I think this is an important step towards legitimizing U.S. Spanish as a variety, okay? So to conclude, what can we do for heritage language maintenance? How can we help young people maintain their heritage languages? Well, if you can't get a full-fledged dual language school, there are a lot of Saturday schools, okay? And they've been in existence for a long time. I think what really helps enrollments in Saturday schools is when you tell the parents, you know what? Put your kid in this Saturday school and they will get credit in their high school, in their local high school. You can also have something called a seal of biliteracy. New York did it first. New York does everything first. They had the seal of biliteracy. California came next, and guess who's number 3 in the seal of biliteracy? Illinois, that's right. We are number 3. We have a seal of biliteracy. You can graduate from high school with a seal that says that you are bilingual, okay? There are community efforts if you can go abroad with young people. That's one of the best things you can do. Have them have peers who don't know any English. That's why I bring my sons to Mexico at least once a year, twice if I can, right? And I make them, well, they have friends now, but I used to, make these play dates and make them go and be friends with that boy. And it's very important to have friends who are, because you know what often happens? I'll speak to them in Spanish, and guess what they answer me in? They answer me in English, and that's very typical. So I've got to create these situations in which the people that they care about, who they're playing with, don't know any English, okay? I also know a group of moms who started a reading group in their local library. They got together, they take turns, and they read to the children. Reading to children in their heritage language is super, super important. So to conclude, if you speak a non-English language, raise your hand if you speak a non-English language. All right, here's what you need to do. Speak it to the children in your family, okay? Read it to them. It is so, so important to read it to them. Media. This is, have you noticed, even on Netflix, you can change the soundtrack and you can put it in the other language. See, and then what you do is you bribe your kids or your nieces and nephews. You bribe them. This is what I do. I give them 10 minutes of movie time, before they go to bed at night. And I say, but if we put it on in Spanish, you get 20 minutes of movie time. Okay, put it on in Spanish, right? So bribery is really, really good. Saturday schools, if you can find them, and of course the best, bringing them to the monolingual country, the TwoWay Immersion school. If you have one, send them there. If you don't have one, start fighting for one. Get together with other parents. They will be interested in this. There's no downside. The English doesn't suffer. The heritage language gets developed. Now, if you're monolingual in English and you want to cure your monolingualism, right? Well, of course, the best thing you can do is find a partner who speaks another language and marry them. That's number one, okay? But if you can't manage that, put your kids in classes, the children in your family, put them in classes. There are tutors. Some people can afford a nanny in another language. I've seen people in my Heritage Speaker program in Chicago who had nannies from Guatemala or from other places, and their Spanish was wonderful. So that's something to think about. There's also media and bribery. And then there's the two-way immersion like Julian went through. And I'm going to conclude with a short video that I think is important to think about. It was a response to the nasty comments of that Coke commercial I told you about. So let me play this video for you, and then we'll open up the floor for questions.
I am American. En inglés y español, I am American. Je parle français, anglais y español, I am American. 我讲中文和英文，I'm American. En English, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, I'm American. En inglesnya, en amarilnya, en agrado. I'm American. I am American. Man English و فارسی حرف میزنم. I am American.
Я говорю по-английски и по-русски. I am American.
Говорю English, I'm American.
Vorbesc engleză, portugheză și românește. I'm American. Anything English and Malayalam since I'm an American. मैं अंग्रेजी और उर्दू बोलती हूँ. I am American. 나는 영어와 한국말을 합니다. I am American. Yes, 호수는 하얘는 영어는 and I am American. I am American. Attention, İngilizce konuşuyorum. I am American. मी मराठी आणि इंग्लिश बोलतो. I am American. Fahad Fahadla, Enrica, Ior Somalika. I am American. I'm American. I am American. I am American. I am American.
I am American.
I'm American. I'm not backing you to and I'm American.
So that, my friends, is what English Plus looks like. So thank you for your attention, and if we have any time for questions or answers. Yes?
You had a slide up about 3 different categories of languages being the most difficult. I think Romance
Right.
was the first, and it went to Russian. What was number 3?
Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, Korean. Yeah, I think if you Google Monterey Language Institute, I think is the one, the Government Language Institute.
Monterey?
Monterey Language Institute. Or I think even if you Google, U.S. military categories, difficult languages, Google will give you what you need, for sure. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes?
The TwoWay Immersion programs, are they pretty well spread out in the U.S., or are they more focused in areas like Texas and California, New York?
That's an excellent question. I don't know off the top of my head what the geographical distribution is, but if you go to the Center for Applied Linguistics, CAL.org, they have a directory.
Okay.
You know what? It would be great if they had a map that could tell you where they were. But they have a state-by-state thing, where that would take you a long time. You'd have to go state by state and see what's there.
I taught in Texas, and they had a Williams program in addition that I taught, but I hadn't heard of too many programs that were similar to what they had there.
You're probably right. I mean, I know that there's some, for example, in the Midwest. They tend to be in the larger cities, and there's not even 400 in the country.
Right.
There's not that, and they're not all in Spanish. About 93% of them are in Spanish, but we have them in French, Chinese, Navajo, a couple of other, I said Chinese, yeah. Other thoughts, yeah?
I know that there has been a little bit more of a movement for the dual language elementary schools. but I haven't seen that carry on much beyond elementary school. Has there been any movement in that?
Oh, you're going to make me talk about the sad part. Yeah, there's no articulation that I know of at the high schools. I have heard of one high school that started to look at articulation. But you're right, what happens is a kid like Julian or Joaquin, right, gets out of 8th grade, reading Harry Potter in Spanish, they're doing great. They go and take the high school placement test, which is designed for second language learners, fill in the blank with the correct form of the blah, blah, blah. They didn't learn Spanish that way, right? And then they get stuck in Spanish too. Why? Because we don't care as a nation, right? We're growing these wonderful little plants, and then they get to high school, and we just, that's what we do. Yes?
There's been a push to replace foreign language classes with computer programming because people cite like Google Translate, which does an okay job, and also that it's a better use of educational resources for the 21st century. How do you feel about computer programming either being optioned as a foreign language or replacing foreign language classes?
Well, I disagree with kind of everything you just cited. I don't think it's for better use. Have you seen Google Translate?
Yes, I'm not a proponent of it.
No, I know you're not. I'm just saying, you wouldn't want your doctor to do anything to you based on what he learned or she learned through Google Translate. You really wouldn't. My husband does computer programming, so I'm not going to knock it as a field nor as an intellectual endeavor. I think it does make your brain nice and strong. But my husband's also trying to learn other languages. I think there's great value. You know, we can talk about the economic value. We can talk about the humanistic value. We can talk about the intercultural competence value. I think there should be room for both. I would not advocate replacing at all. Yeah.
And just to piggyback off that, I think that's a huge difference between learning a foreign language and something like music or computer programming, which could in some ways be considered a language. There's no cultural component, and that is tremendously different to a human being, I think, in terms of an intellectual endeavor.
Right. Sometimes those of us who go with those arguments, the humanistic and the, other people kind of think it's just a bunch of kumbaya, stuff. I don't think they really get, a lot of times it's not folks who've been abroad, who've learned another language, who've experienced what that's really like and the value of that. It's easy to be like that in this country, when 80% of us are like that, right? I think if you could just require people to go abroad in high school, maybe, for a week or two, just to get that experience, I don't know, that might help. Yeah?
What percentage of public schools offer the immersion into two languages?
Excellent question. What percent of U.S. public schools, elementary schools, offer the dual language? Well, I don't know how many schools there are in the nation, but I know fewer than 400 of them offer dual language. So I think the math is very few. I can tell you only 26% of elementary schools in this country offer any kind of foreign language education. And we include in that 26%, the kind where the kid goes for half an hour a week. And in first grade, they learn colors, numbers, days of the week. And then in second grade, they learn colors, numbers, days of the week. And then in third grade, guess what they learn?
Are there similar statistics available for charter schools? But there are so many recently that
There are.
schools with bilingual where they teach both two languages.
My sense is that the Center for Applied Linguistics that we talked about earlier, they have this database. And of course, there may be more dual language schools than those that sign up for them. But the schools have a strong incentive to sign up and be counted in this database. So my sense is that charter, private, and public schools, if they have a dual language program, they have a strong incentive to sign up and be counted in this database. What little I know about charter schools in Chicago is that they do not value languages whatsoever. And they have a lot of heritage speakers, and they do nothing to maintain those heritage languages.
I agree. In the big government, even through the crisis, in order to support the dissemination of the culture, the heritage, and the language, support schools in Australia, in the United States, in England,
Right.
where they send their teachers.
Yes. They're wonderful schools. Chicago has a very strong Greek Saturday school. I have a number of friends who went to Greek Saturday schools. Chicago, we have Greek Saturday schools, Lithuanian Saturday schools, Polish Saturday schools, and the kids all complain bitterly. I hate it. My parents make me go. I'd rather be at home playing with my friends. But you know what they say as adults? I am so glad my parents made me go. I've never heard anybody say, God, I wish my parent hadn't forced me to learn that language. Like, I've never ever heard it, right? They're always grateful later on. I wish that some of the Spanish-speaking governments, I'm looking at you, Julio, would send some money to the United States to support their heritage languages. Absolutely. Actually, the Cervantes does do quite a bit. The Cervantes, they're pricey, though. You know, they're pricey. We should be getting donations, right? Yeah, sorry.
I teach at one of these schools with my daughter, and they send teachers, it's a charter school, and they teach a lot of Greek during the day. It's an American school, not dual language, but it's prerequisite, and so it's not a Saturday school, and they send
Wonderful.
teachers for 3 years at a time, and they keep their position there and support them a little bit economically, and they come here. So
I love that.
yeah, I don't know if more countries do it, but it's a big investment, but it's really a good idea.
I know that Spain does this. In fact, we have a fella in Chicago whose sole job it is to help all the Spaniards who come every year. And they teach for 3 years in the Chicago public schools. But again, some of them are teaching, you know, that 30 minutes a day type of thing. If we could have more dual language schools and plug those teachers in. I want more teachers from Mexico. Because 63% of our Spanish speakers in this country are from Mexico. I would love to see that kind of connection happening a bit more. But that sounds like a great program. We should do more of that. And send our teachers abroad, right, to teach English. And then we have that neat connection that we were talking about earlier. You get out a little bit. We need to get out more as a country. People need to get out and see stuff. You know how many Americans, I should say United Statesians, have a passport? Take a wild guess, the percent of United States citizens who have passports. Eligible for one and have one. How many? 23%. We're not getting out. Well, as we say in Mexico, les estoy viendo las caras de tacos. I don't know if anybody else is starting to. Any further thoughts or questions? Yes, my doctor friend.
Such an encouraging and informative program. I just wanted to say, with a little bit of effort, language really can become a bridge between cultures instead of a barrier.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And that's why I bring, and I know Julio does too, we bring students on study abroad programs. It's just really important. I definitely agree. This is a fellow who, how many different languages? He can say something in like 700 languages or something.
70.
70, okay, 70, I exaggerated. I'm a little hyperbolic if you didn't get that already. He can say a little something in 70 different languages. He uses it with his patients, right, to see, you know, what sort of level of pain they might have. I was telling him how when I get into a cab, I always learn to say thank you, and whatever, because it's always a different guy in Chicago from some country I've probably never heard of. And then I write it down, and then I know how to say it. So just every little bit, you know, I think helps.
A lot to learn from them.
And learn from them, right.
How many languages do you actually speak?
No, I'm just proficient in English, but I speak a little bit of all those other ones. But I could just know the pain word, count from 1 to 10, the grade, the pain, and of course the basic hello, how are you, thank you, you're welcome. Words like that.
I don't know how you keep them straight. That's a lot. I know. But yeah, if I had a magic wand, if I was just granted one wish, it would be the dual language schools. I think it all starts with the kids, right? Because I see these little kids like Julian. You know, granted, his parents put him there, so they have certain sort of open ideas anyway, right? But if all schools did this, my sense is that we would be raising a lot of young people who are not linguistically xenophobic, right? Who maybe don't tolerate those kind of Coca-Cola commercial nasty comments. Who, if they're around that, they engage in linguistic activism and they say, you know what? I speak that language too. I'm American. I have friends who speak that. I went to that, etc. Right? Change the conversation, change the discourse. I think that would go a long way. You got to start with the kids. But it's not too late for you. If you want to go learn another language, go do it for sure. Well, thank you very much for your time.